Put simply, splines are a sequence of vertices connected by lines. If you're familiar with Adobe Illustrator, you'll be aware of splines already. They're called paths in Illustrator. In the case of Cinema 4D, splines live in 3D space, and their vertices can be manipulated in the X, Y, and Z axis. A common motion graphics task is to reproduce a logo in 3D, and we're going to cover the various techniques and processes you'll need to follow to accomplish this task. But let's first look at the fundamentals of working with splines in C4D. So I might just filter the viewport a bit so you can see these lines a bit easier, and you can come up to here and just filter grid, and I'm just going to filter the world axis as well. So a line that is created between the vertices can be straight or curved. It all depends on the type of spline, and the type of spline defines the interpolation. In the straight spline, the spline type is set to linear, and the interpolation between the points is hard. With the curved spline, the type of spline is set to Bezier, and if we select a vertex, we have handles that control that point. Now, these handles define the interpolation between these points, and we can see the soft interpolation creates a smooth curve. A spline is made up of segments. If we're looking at this circle, we can see it appears to be one spline. But the spline has several segments to define the inner and the outer circles. The splines can be open or closed. If we open this spline up, you can see the last segment doesn't join with the first. And you can see when we have this spline selected that it's color-coded. The start of the spline is white and the end of the spline is blue. And this also helps us to see the segments clearly, see the gradient. And so the spline is color-coded so you can see its direction, and this becomes important when you want to move an object along the spline path. So you can right-click, and then you can change the order of the paths as well. So we could set this point to be the first point, and you see now this is white and it comes all the way around and the spline ends here. So let's talk about intermediate points now. So intermediate points can be thought of as the resolution of the spline, and the settings here define the number of points in each segment. So this becomes important when you're working with generators, such as this extrude, and we'll get into all of these a bit later, as it affects the number of subdivisions created. And if I rotate this around, you can see that the extrude is being subdivided by the spline here and the intermediate points. It's quite easy to show you. If I turn this down to none, you remember those segments that we had. If I just turn this off, between each segment, there are no intermediate points. So now if I turn this up to natural, it's going to put the number of points here in between each segment. So you can control that, and you'll see when we enable the extrude that it's being interpolated in a different way because it has no intermediate points. So you can create different shapes based on the resolution of the spline. So we've got all these different modes, and they are all fairly similar. This one's the default one, adaptive, and you can just, similar to when you had a number of points, you can change the angle. So if you increase the angle, we reduce the number of intermediate points. And then if you get really low, it gets kind of crazy. And then subdivided is quite similar to adaptive, but this is usually better when you're working with type. For example, you can see we've got way more resolution here. And if you're working with something that's being deformed, then you might want to use subdivided. Just bear those in mind, and it's always good just to play with the spline types, because as you've seen, we've been able to cycle between different spline types, and it's completely non-destructive. Now finally, splines don't render by default. If we turn this extrude off and press Command R, we're not going to see anything. You need to give them volume by making them a child of a generator. We'll get onto generators in a little while, but for now, the key takeaways are that splines are a sequence of points connected by lines that occupy 3D space.